control.
Oh, my goodness. I think we're
She's
fine.
there.
Hey! We got her.
Yeah. Mhm.
Hi, guys. We have success.
That-a-way.
Like you were
Yeah.
coming all the way from Iran or something.
Seriously, when you first failed, try again, right?
Yeah.
Well, good. I'm glad. Finally, we're on. Thanks for being patient with me, guys.
Yeah. Welcome, Afsoon. We're glad to have you and happy you were able to join us today. It's awesome. So looking forward to the
Thank you.
conversation.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So normally we, want to say thank you to our sponsors, all that stuff. Let's get past that. Let's get right to it here. So Afsoon, again, really excited to have you on. So one of the things that we sent out when we were doing the promo for this was your journey, and that you were a pioneer, and a pioneer in every sense of the word. So I know I'd be curious. I don't know about anybody else on this call, but I'd be curious. I just want to hear some of your story. Just kind of, where'd you start? How did this all come about?
Right. Yeah. So, I was born in Iran, and wrestling is huge in Iran. And my father was a wrestler, and so he had always wanted a wrestler in his family. Well, he wanted a son that would follow in his footsteps and be a wrestler, because girls didn't wrestle back in the early 70s, or really that long ago. And when my parents had me and I was an only child and happened to be a girl, he didn't let that stop him from having a wrestler follow in his footsteps in our family. And so he kind of would teach me technique, and just in our house we would move the living room table, and he would show me wrestling moves and technique, and just more so I think for fun, or as a way to defend myself, but always deep down he had hoped to have a wrestler. And so in Iran, of course, that opportunity wasn't there. And then on top of that, we ended up, we were in Iran during the time where the Iranian revolution, the Islamic revolution took place, and also the Iran-Iraq war. So the country was in a lot of turmoil, and it really wasn't a good environment for anybody, but especially for if you were female. And we had to abide by Islamic law and be covered up, and a lot of restrictions. And so my parents never thought that wrestling was ever anything that their daughter would be doing. And again, my dad and I just wrestled under our own roof in my house. And so it wasn't until we were able to flee Iran and come to the United States. And, I kind of wanted to be really accepted and become the all-American girl. Because being Iranian now we're talking the early 80s in the United States wasn't really a good thing, because it was right after the Iranian hostage crisis, where in 1979 Iran took Americans hostage, and there was a lot of conflict between the United States and Iran. And so at that time, like I said, being this Iranian girl who had just immigrated to the United States, it was really tough, and so I really wanted to become accepted, and I wanted to be this all-American girl. And so in high school, what happened initially was I joined cheerleading. I went out for the cheerleading team, because that's kind of what, it was an all-American girl thing to do. And so I tried that. And during the season, we had the football season, and then the wrestling season would start, and the cheerleaders would keep stats for the wrestlers. And I remember, watching the wrestlers going, this is what I want to do. And I love wrestling, and I grew up with this, and I know this technique, and this is what my father has taught me. And then I also came to the realization that, living in the United States, I had those opportunities, you know, even though women's wrestling wasn't really a thing even back then. There weren't girls really wrestling, still early 80s. It wasn't something that I was legally going to be stopped from doing, or, you know, in Iran, I would have been stoned to death, right? There wasn't even that wouldn't have even been a thought or an option. But I realized in the United States, even though girls wrestling and women's wrestling hadn't really started yet, legally, I was able to go out for the boys wrestling team if I wanted to. And so it wasn't good enough for me just to keep stats for the wrestling team. I wanted to actually go out there and wrestle. And so, you know, I did approach the wrestling coach, and he said, well, okay, yeah, you can come out for my team. But at that time, Independence had a powerhouse of a wrestling team. The boys wrestling team was really good. And so, you know, he wasn't, and I'm sure a lot of wrestling coaches initially think, well, why is this girl wanting to come out for my boys' high school team, right? Like, what are her motives? What are her intentions? And I had to really prove to him that I was there for my love of wrestling, and that I really loved the sport. And just because I was a girl wasn't a reason for me not to be able to pursue this wonderful sport that was a passion of mine. And so that's how it all got started. And I started on the boys wrestling team in high school, competing.
So Afsoon, was the pushback more from coaches, administrators, other parents? I mean, where was the push, or teammates? I mean, where was the pushback from?
Absolutely from everybody and anybody around me. I think the only person that was at the time supporting me to wrestle was my father. and that was it, because girls wrestling just wasn't a thing. People didn't see girls wrestling back then. And so I remember, again, like I said, Independence was a pretty powerful wrestling program, and it's produced some amazing male wrestlers out of that high school as well. You know, my head coach was Dave Shade, who was Dan Shade's brother, and we had guys like Dave Schultz would come into our high school wrestling room, and Bobby Douglas would come into our high school wrestling room. So it was really a powerhouse of a wrestling program. And so the coaches, of course, didn't, you know, want to just let this girl walk on the team. So there was pushback from that initially, until I almost had to kind of prove myself. But there was also pushback from my teammates initially, in that, look, this is not a joke. We work hard. We're a winning program. And so if you're going to be wanting to come and practice with us, you're going to have to be able to hang, right? And so I had to prove to them, not only could I hang, but I was going to do just as much, if not more, than anybody else in that round in order to be successful, right? And then once I earned, I think, the respect of my high school coaches and my teammates, then there was a lot of pushback from the rest of the wrestling community, right? My opponents, the other high schools I had to compete against. In fact, my coaches had to really put their necks on the line. And you know, Terry, and a lot of, I think, coaches that supported women's wrestling in the very beginning, at the start of the program, it wasn't a popular thing. So then to go and support women and coach women, you know, coaches were ridiculed by other coaches that didn't believe in it. And so I know my high school coaches, my teammates kind of really went through that. And those first few years was a big struggle, and I'll tell you what. And then I remember having some success, and because, you know, and the wrestling program really prepared me, and I really worked hard because it was something I really loved to do. And I ended up starting to have some success. And with that success came a lot of media attention. And I remember they did this big article on the front page of that I was in San Jose. Independence was in San Jose, California, and it was the San Jose Mercury News front page of the sports section. And it showed me wrestling, you know, a boy. And this is back in the day before the internet, right? So there was the yellow pages and the white pages and whatnot. And I remember when that article in the newspaper appeared, and it had my name and it had my parents' name, people were calling my house, finding our phone number from the white pages and calling my house and making threats, death threats, really, and to my father. Why are you letting your daughter roll around with boys? Why are you letting your daughter wrestle with boys? And then, and that wasn't just from the Iranian community, that was from all the community. That was, like I said, from everyone around us. So a girl wrestling at that time was really frowned upon. And, it was definitely not only not supported, but just everybody just looked at it as, oh, this is a sideshow. This is no joke. What are you doing, girl? Go. And my dad would hear comments from like the people that were watching during tournaments, like, oh, tell her to go play with her dolls, with her Barbies. What is she doing on the wrestling mat? There were comments like that all the time. And so it definitely was a hard time those first few years. So I knew, for me, not only was I representing myself, but I had to show people that girls, just like boys, if they love the sport and they love wrestling, why shouldn't they be able? And why are girls being ridiculed for wanting to follow a sport that they're passionate about and they love? Why shouldn't we have that opportunity and that chance and that support? And so that's I remember, that's where it started.
Oh, it's interesting. I'll bet there wasn't the same ridicule for athletes that were in judo or taekwondo or karate or anything like that. It was wrestling world, correct?
Right.
That's what when I first jumped into the job that I'm in now, it was very interesting to me that even in the early 2000s, there was, still a lot of hesitation about women's wrestling, but for taekwondo and karate and judo, and there was none, right? So any other martial art you could do without ridicule or harassment, but wrestling, for some reason, you couldn't.
Right. It was always thought of as a male sport, as a male dominated sport, wrestling from the Olympic days, the first Olympics, and you have a figure of two guys wrestling. And so it was always thought of as a male sport. Whereas, with, I think, judo and taekwondo and some of the other martial arts, you're right, it wasn't looked at that way. So it took a long time, I think, to kind of change that thought process. And so, I really, I think the reason we've come as far as we've come in these last 30 years, now we still have a ways to go, but I think one of the big reasons that we've come this way, this far, is because there have been coaches such as yourself and other coaches that did put their necks on the line and were open-minded enough and were able to talk to their fellow male coaches and male wrestlers and say, come watch these women wrestle, come watch these girls wrestle, and they're learning technique and they're loving the sport, and let's change that thinking about them and about our sport. Why are we closing this off to half the population? It makes no sense. Women's wrestling only helps men's wrestling, and men's wrestling helps women's wrestling. I envision our sport, hopefully, like in high schools, kind of like how track is or how cross country is, where you have, the male athletes competing against other male athletes, and then male track runners are competing against other male track runners, and the female track runners are competing against other female track runners, but they're still all one team. And it's the men's and women's cross country team. It's the men's and women's track team, and they support each other, and it's one team. But they're competing, the girls are competing against other girls and the boys are competing against other boys, but they're supporting each other. And so I really hope to see that with wrestling, to where every high school has a girls wrestling team as well that competes against other girls.
Yeah, and I really think it's moving there, right? It's not there yet, but I think that's just a generational change, right? As the young kids now that are wrestling and have started wrestling, they've never known wrestling without women, right?
Yeah.
Without women on the mats beside them, and so as they get into, being the next coaches and the next high school coaches, and that's what's really happened over the last 10 years is these kids, the young coaches right now have always known, or for a large part of their career have only known wrestling with women involved in the sport, and now it seems very normal and natural to them to have women's teams. Why don't we have a women's team? Right?
Exactly.
So the coaches that aren't supportive and maybe don't see it, they'll eventually age out, right? And they'll move on with life, right? And that's what will happen.
You
Some will never, right?
right. Can't resist it anymore. If you fight it and you keep resisting it, it's just going to hurt our sport. It's going to hurt wrestling as a whole. You see what happened to some of the, colleges. I mean, Stanford, perfect example right now, right? Or where you really need to bring in women's teams to help men's teams so that they don't use the Title IX excuse and cut programs, or women's wrestling really, again, helps men's wrestling. So we don't see what happened in 2013 with our sport being, taken away from the Olympics. And so really, we have to be forward thinkers, and we can't resist it anymore. It's just women's wrestling is going to help men's wrestling, and men's wrestling is going to help women's wrestling. And you're right, like this new generation, they're used to seeing women on the mat. They don't think it's anything different or strange about it. And what I would like, a message I would like to get across, and hopefully I do somewhat with this book, is, while I'm still alive, and while the girls from my generation, the women from my generation, the pioneers, when we first started wrestling, while we're still alive, I would love for this new generation, this younger generation of girls in wrestling, to know a little bit about their history, right? Because it's still very young, it's 30 something years. In 1989 was the first World Championship. So we're still alive and we're still around. And so I'm hoping to still be able to reach out to this generation of wrestlers and get them to know a little bit about their history, and really to know what opportunities they have currently, and to take advantage of those opportunities, and to keep growing our sport.
Yeah. So take us back a little bit, Afsoon, back to like the first years of going to the World Championships and the first national team camps, and just talk about those experiences and how that ever came about and things like that.
It was very different back then, right? Because again, like I was saying, we didn't really have the support of the general population of most people. And so the first year they had the World Championships, they introduced women's wrestling, and it was at the same place in the same venue as the men's World Championships. So you had women's freestyle, you had men's freestyle, and you had men's Greco. And all three styles, the World Championships was in Martigny, Switzerland. And that was the first year they had the World Championships for women. And, for me, I was so awestruck and so starstruck. Like, here I was wrestling alongside the same men that had been like my heroes, and I had their wrestling posters up on my wall, right? John Smith's wrestling on the mat next to me. And for me, it almost like legitimized it finally, like, oh, wow, okay, we are being accepted, and we are finally on the mat, wrestling alongside men's wrestling at a venue like the World Championships. And so, and that was amazing. And that's the first time I saw like a lot of male wrestlers were looking and watching our matches and going, okay, they're wrestling and they really know what they're doing, which was great. Well, the following year in 1990, which was the second year they had the World Championships, they separated out the styles. So men's Greco was in a different country, different venue. Men's freestyle was somewhere else. And then women's freestyle, they had us in Luleå, Sweden. And it was an event all by ourselves, the Women's World Championships. And boy, was that different, you know. And again, I don't think they meant anything demeaning or anything different by it, but it just shows you where the thought process was at the time, where instead of the most outstanding wrestler award, they were giving out the most beautiful wrestler award. And so I kid you not, they called out the most beautiful wrestler and placed a tiara on her head. And then, you know, in that World Championships, I medaled as well. And so, you know how now you go on the podium and you get your medal hung around your neck, and then you usually get like a belt or a trophy or something. When that World Championships, 1990 World Championships, they gave us kitchen appliances. So they gave, and I kid you not, like I look back and did that really happen? Yeah, that they really gave me a saute pan along with my world silver medal. And I think my teammate and best friend Marie Ziegler got a food processor. And so, you know, I mean, that's an interesting message, right? That we were trying not to go, well, I don't, what is the message they're sending? That we belong on the wrestling mat, but then once we're done wrestling, we belong in the kitchen, you know, but it was just the sign of the times. And so to go from that to where we are now, whereas, you know, at the last Olympic trials, I noticed the audience was watching more of the women's matches and being excited and cheering the women on, more so than even some of the men matches. And so that was really, really neat to see that this actually happened in my lifetime. But I would love to see where it goes 30 years from now.
Yeah. I think two things that really helped is, number one, obviously getting the Olympic status, right? I mean, that was a huge aspect to legitimizing the sport. But then I think the other thing within the sport that they did was when they brought the World Championships together, all the World Championships. Because I agree with you, like in 2002, that was my first World Championships as a national team coach. And it was the World Championships for the women were in Athens, Greece, and it was a separate location from men's freestyle or men's Greco World Championships. It was a completely different atmosphere. And then in 2003, they had the World Championships in New York City, where it was men's freestyle and women's freestyle. And that was kind of the first time they brought the two styles together. And then eventually after that, I think in 2005 was the first year after the 2004 Olympics. In 2005, they brought all three styles or disciplines together for World Championships. And I think it was the most important thing for the advancement of women's wrestling, but really for the health and vitality of the sport in general, because everyone could see everyone else.
Yes.
And I think it was so important, and it's been so important, I think, to keep it together, because there's been talk at different times. There isn't so much anymore, but there was during the last 15 years or so that they were going to separate them back out again. And I was really thinking that would be a step backwards, and keeping them together really has been. It showcases the sport of wrestling, right? And I think that was a huge step in the right direction when UWW made those decisions, or former FILA, but now UWW made those decisions, right? So,
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Yeah, I agree. And again, like I said, women's wrestling helps men's wrestling, wrestling helps women's wrestling. So you shouldn't separate it out. We should have it all as a united sport.
So, Afsoon, you mentioned your book, and we talked about it the other day, and we want to make sure that you have some time to share with our audience here just what is your book about. And while you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to screen share, and I want to show your website and where everyone can go to see that. But go ahead, tell us a little bit about your book.
Thank you. Yeah, I am very, very excited about this book. You know, again, as I mentioned before, it can share some of the history of what the world championships and what the early days of women's wrestling was like, and some of the struggles that I, along with a lot of other female wrestlers, had to go through. But so that's why I think every wrestler, it would be good for them to read this book and just kind of familiarize with what the history of it was like. But I'm also really excited about this book because, a lot of people who have heard my story have said, oh, this really should be a book. There's some interesting things, some unbelievable things that have occurred. And, again, from my time in Iran and the revolution and living through the war, and then, some of the stories there, and then immigrating to United States, and then some of the hardships. So I think the book really captures all of that. It has some funny stories. It has some really sad stories. But people have always said your story really should be turned into a book. And so it's finally here, and it's finally been turned into a book. So I'm really, really excited about it. And I'm really wanting it to get into the hands of, every reader. But for me especially, absolutely love it for young girl wrestlers, every female wrestler, to be able to get a copy of it. And then I hope to, motivate and inspire them, because it does talk about some obstacles and hardships, and, I was able to overcome it. And so I hope my stories in there can be, motivational and inspirational for the young readers. So, but yeah.
Yeah, because it is interesting, because roughly we're around the same age, and really how, very similar journeys through a sport, but how different they were, right? I mean, we grew up during the same time. We came through a system, or a lack of a system in your case, that there was for you set up, and came through the sport of wrestling. And wrestling obviously is an impact on both of us, but completely different journeys and pathways, right? And completely different experiences.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is the book available right now?
Yes. So the book is out, and you can get it on that website, www.afsoonwrestling, all one word, afsoonwrestling.com. So if you go on that website, you'll see there's some quotes from some people we might know that have read it. And then you can purchase the book directly from the website. And I'm, like I said, really excited about getting this book in the hands of the whole wrestling community.
Absolutely. That website, it's in the chat right now. So if you're interested, you can go ahead, just click on that link, and it'll take you directly to her website, and you can place the order for that book as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I thought it was really funny the other day when we had our planning call that most everybody who's been on here knows that I just had a little one a couple months ago. So I was holding her, and she started to cry as we were talking. And so my wife came out and got her, and Afsoon, you made a comment and said, "Oh, you got a wrestler." So, we'll see if that's a path she chooses. But and everybody, I'm not joking. It was like the next 3 or 4 minutes, Afsoon was telling me why my daughter needs to be a wrestler. I said, "I'll tell you right now, I am okay with it. If that's what she wants to do, we'll go for it full bore." But it was really funny. Just, got a wrestler. My wife had a little different take on that a second later, but that's a different conversation.
Like Afsoon said the other day, we've got a lot of time to work on it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, they'll come around.
So, Afsoon, something I wanted to ask you was, you were a pioneer early on in women's wrestling here in this country, and you spent some time away from wrestling, and now you've come back, and you were saying just how fired up you are to help and to help grow. So from 30 years ago to now, it's been a drastic change. Do you have any kind of vision of what you hope that women's wrestling looks like in 30 years from now?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the big things, a message that I do want to get out, women wrestlers, and you see that within the wrestling community, right? That when you're an athlete, you're competing, and then you retire and your competition days are over, and then you know, life happens, right? You get married and have kids, but what happens a lot of times, forget to come back and give back to the sport, right? And that's one of the things that, especially I think, for male wrestlers, but even more so for female wrestlers, it's important for us to do, right? Because if I had finished my competition years and then retired and then never come back to the sport, that doesn't help our sport grow. And so what I'm actually asking of the girls of this generation, and like, I'm considered kind of the grandma of the sport now, right? Used to be the mom of the sport, and now, you know, I'm the grandma of the sport. But the generation before me, they're the ones that are retiring now and going and starting families, which is absolutely great. But you really can't do it all. It doesn't have to be one or the other. You can be a wife, you can be a mom, and you can still be a wrestler, and you can still give back to the sport, and don't leave the sport that's right. So I would say come back and contribute and give back to it any way that you can, whether that's coming back and serving on a committee, or coming back and coaching your local wrestling club and getting more girls out for the sport, or whether that's just continuing to attend wrestling tournaments and support wrestling, and bring your little ones and have them watch wrestling and fall in love with the sport. But don't walk away from it, you know. And especially as women, we tend to be, not always, but mostly, the primary caregivers of our children, of the babies. And so we keep thinking that once we have our family, that, you know, that's it, we can't, wrestling is over. And that's what I had initially thought, you know, and boy, was I wrong about that, because we can still give so much to the sport, as moms and as wives, and we can come back as coaches. And in fact, we need to do that, and we need to be role models for the next generation and open up those opportunities, so that 30 years from now, our sport is continuing to grow in numbers, continuing to grow in just technique and in support, and in getting it into the mainstream, and having people watch women's wrestling. Like, I tell you, a few years ago, someone still asked me, "Oh, there's women's wrestling? I didn't know women wrestled." And I was like, "Are you kidding me? Why am I still hearing this?" And so 30 years from now, I should not be hearing that at all. Everyone should be familiar with women's wrestling, and everyone should be watching and saying, these are beautiful, strong, athletic, fierce women. And I love watching women's wrestling, and have, you know, our numbers grow and continue to improve in technique and speed and everything else. But we can only accomplish that. How can we expect other people to come and watch us and support us if we're not ourselves coming back and giving back and being a part of it, right? So that's one thing I really am asking of my fellow wrestlers and female wrestlers, is come back, coach, serve on a committee, be involved, bring your kids to wrestling tournaments. And then, you know, hopefully in 30 years, we really see our sport continuing to grow.
That's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we really need that, right? We need everyone back involved, and to continue to be involved. I mean, the sport has played such a huge part in our lives, and to keep that moving forward, you know, it's staying involved. And then it doesn't mean you have to coach. It doesn't mean you have to, you know, be in the practice room every day and this and that. There's so many different ways to help and assist and to move this forward, and
right, stay connected.
Just stay connected, right? I mean, stay connected. And it's so important for the younger generation, the young athletes that are wrestling right now, to know and understand their history and have that perspective of where this started, how it is growing, where it's growing to, you know, and to know the perspective, and to know the history of it is so important, right? To understand where we're at right now, and to understand our struggles and the things we still have to fight for. I mean, to have the perspective of it is such a huge thing, right? And to move it forward in the right direction, I would say. And I guess without turning people away and things like that, right? It's really important.
Yes.
So,
Exactly.
Soon talk a little bit about. So you were kind of away for, like I said, you were kind of away from the sport for 10, 12 years, and then you came back in 2013. You helped with an event that we had up in Canada, I believe. It was during the State Olympic Wrestling. It was like right during that time frame when they were dropping the sport, and you got back involved then, and that led into being the Olympic coach in 2016. And I know that wasn't all great either. There was some bittersweetness to that too. I mean, because that was something that you longed for years, and then you stopped wrestling before it ever happened. And now you're in that situation as a coach. And just talk about, I guess, that what you went through emotionally, I guess, during that time as well.
Yeah, exactly. Being able to come back to the sport, like when I walked away from it, and all those years, I always felt like something was missing, a piece of the puzzle. And it wasn't until I came back in 2012 that it was like kind of like an aha moment, like that itch that needed to be scratched, and you couldn't like quite tell where it was or reach it. And the minute I came back to the sport, it was like that aha moment for me, like, that's what was missing. That's what was nagging at me. And I just all of a sudden felt like right back at home, right where I belonged. Wrestling had been such a big part of me for so many of my years, and that having been away from it, there was this void. And so coming back, it just felt like that itch had finally been scratched. But at the same time, like you said, for me, my dream had always been to compete in the Olympics. And the timing of it it didn't happen for me. In 2000 was when I would have loved to have competed in the Olympics. And there was at that time talk of women's wrestling debuting in the 2000 Olympics. And unfortunately that didn't happen until 2004. And so I was forced, I was at that crossroads, do I retire now or and start a family and go on with my life? Or do I put my life on hold for another 4 years and train? Again, with no guarantees. At that time, we didn't know, would it still even be in the Olympics in 2004? And so, luckily it was. But for me, it was very bittersweet, because here I was in 2004, just ecstatic and so happy to be able to finally see that women's wrestling had made it into the Olympics, and it was being televised, and I was watching women's wrestling in the Olympics. So that meant the world to me. But then, of course, I was on the couch in my living room and not there. I happened to be 9 months pregnant, actually, at the time with my second child, my daughter Sammy. And to this day, I still call her my Olympic gold medal. But so that was, really bittersweet for me to watch. And so I thought, I'm so happy for the women that are competing in the Olympics and got that opportunity. But I guess the Olympics just weren't in the cards for me. It just wasn't something that's ever going to happen for me. And, as much as that bummed me out, it was just something that I thought I couldn't do anything about. And so then all of a sudden comes full circle to where really you talked me into coming back and giving me opportunities that, like, hey, if you want to get back into coaching, if you want to get back involved, here's what you could be doing. And so and again, it was awesome and incredible for me, because it filled that void that was really in my life. I didn't know what was missing. And so coming back as a coach and being involved with the national team again for that quad cycle, and then having the opportunity to help volunteer coach alongside you, it was surreal, and it came full circle for me. I wasn't able to compete myself in the Olympics, but this was even actually better, being able to be in the corner and watching this next generation of women and helping coach them, into reaching their Olympic hopes and dreams. So that was, I can't put into words except that it just was amazing. It felt like it had come full circle for me.
Yeah, no, it was amazing, and it was amazing to see and be a part of as well. I mean, just to to see that, you coming back in and just see the perspective that you gave the girls, and it was just, yeah, it was good all around for sure. It was good for everyone involved. So.
Thank you. But I also think that should be hopefully an example for other women. Again, like I said, come back to the sport. You know, you see a lot of women out there that have had their kids and then they're back winning world medals. I mean, look at Lee Jane, look at, you know, I mean, even Trish Saunders did it back, you know, back in my day. And so there's no reason where you can't have a family and then also still come back and be a part of the sport, whether it's still as an athlete or as a coach, or lots of opportunities.
And there are, and there's going to be more and more and more as this continues to blossom and grow, right? Because, you know, our members, as we've talked about other calls, I mean, the members in women's wrestling are just, I mean, we're growing unbelievably. It's not by 1 or 2%. We're growing. I think last year we grew 27% across the board, right? Just our pure numbers, and that's huge, right? And the college programs keep adding, and the states sanctioned. I mean, we went from, you know, for the longest time we had 3 states that had women's wrestling that was sanctioned. We're up to 28 or 29 states, I think. So it's just, you know, it's just really taken off, and that's not going to stop anytime soon. It just continues on. So
No, that's awesome. Right.
So I want to take just a quick second here. Afsoon, we've got some questions, and I want to make sure we get to them. But before we do that, you know, we want to make sure and mention how this whole webinar series is possible. And we've got a partnership with our team Global Energy, with USA Wrestling and Ambit Energy. And you'll give everyone who's registered for these, which is almost 450 people now, you're going to get an email tomorrow, just kind of putting some information out there to you. You know, we're getting to a point now to where we need some support to be able to continue this webinar series. So let me just go ahead and just share a couple names. This isn't even all of them, but you know, we've had Tom Ryan on, we've had Olympic champ Helen Maroulis, we've had Clarissa Chun, Randy Couture, Dan Gable, Ken Chertaw, Gene Mills, you know, on and on and on. So we've had some of the best in the world, you know, on this webinar series, talking about mentality, talking about training through COVID, and we've, you know, it's been an unbelievable experience. It's time now that we ask for your support in return, so we can continue these, and you'll get some information tomorrow about how to do so. And I'm going to drop a link here in the chat where you can, if you're interested in finding out just how you can help support us to continue this. It's not just by giving money, FYI. Okay, we're just throw that out there. Okay, we've got a partnership, and hopefully we can return the favor to you directly for your support. So if you click on that link right there, you can go and you can schedule a call with Terry or myself or Alex or any of our other team to find out exactly what we're doing. Okay, so I want to throw that in there. So Afsoon, as we've, you know, talked about your involvement coming back, you know, I see the smile on your face when you talk about it, and just how excited you are. So what roles are you currently involved in with wrestling, and what do you hope that you may be able to do some more of in the future?
Yeah, really good question. I'll actually get involved as Terry lets me. But currently, you know, I'm serving on a few different committees, and involved locally. You know, of course, COVID has right now limited in what we could do on the mat, especially where I live in my area in California, Southern California. But I was going to a lot of different high schools and high school wrestling rooms, and I was doing a lot of clinics and a lot of actually pep rallies at different schools, and talking to young high school girls, trying to get them interested and involved, and having them come out for wrestling. And then, like I said, also then in the wrestling rooms doing different clinics with them. And then, you know, nationally, again, on committee work. But what I would love to do is possibly be in a role like a role model or an ambassador for our sport, and to be able to continue, to serve and give back in any way that I can in that role. And then again, hands-on, whatever Terry and whatever the team and whatever the athletes need, definitely there, and would love to be able to give back in whatever ways.
Right. Awesome.
We'll start making our list.
So I see Eric put down that that he just ordered 9 books for, or ordered a book for each of his 9 returning girls.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I love it. Thank you for your support.
So question for you. Do you have any strategies for recruiting high school girls?
Yeah. So what I personally like to do is, again, go on actual high school campuses. The rallies, a lot of times they'll have sport rallies, and I'll wear my USA Wrestling jacket, and I'll go and I'll talk to the group of high school students, and it's usually the rallies, you get big numbers there, and just let them know about how great of a sport wrestling is, and all the opportunities that is available right now for girls and for their future in wrestling. And in what wrestling has given me, I've been able to travel the world representing my country and doing the sport I love. And so not too many other sports you would be able to get into right away. And if you work so hard at it, have success, in a shorter amount of time. Right now, there's a lot of college programs that are adding women's teams. And so there's a lot of opportunity there. And so I talk to these high school girls about those opportunities. And it seems like parents are becoming more and more open-minded in letting their daughters wrestle. Another thing that I've noticed that has helped is I go to wrestling tournaments. And you, a lot of times, either whether it's an all girls wrestling tournament, and then you sit there and talk to their friends that are there to watch them wrestle, and you go, well, why don't you wrestle? Why don't you come out for the team? Or you see, boys tournaments, and you see a lot of the sisters there that, again, look at it and go, well, I want to do that. I think I can do that. And so they just need sometimes a little bit of encouragement. I also, again, I've been targeting a lot of high schools just because my own kids, my own daughters are in high school. And so that's, a population that I have easier access to. But, I think just encouraging girls that have thought about it. And then another thing is a lot of the girls that are involved in judo or some of the other martial arts, they're already physical. They like the grappling part of it. Let them know that the wrestling's available as a sport for them, that they can switch over, maybe that they'll just absolutely fall in love with and love it. That's I see a lot of girls crossing over from those sports. So but I think also nowadays we can catch girls really young. There's a lot of wrestling clubs, and parents will bring their sons and sign up their sons, and telling those parents, hey, look, your daughter really wants to wrestle too. Why don't you also enroll her, And so I'm seeing that being more and more parents, the younger parents now are being a lot more open to it than parents were maybe 20, 30 years ago, because now they're seeing it more, and they're seeing that it's acceptable, and they're seeing, girls are starting to be more, being tough. And just because you're tough and physical and athletic doesn't mean you're going to not be feminine. You're not going to be a girl, And so I think a lot of parents are starting to see other girls do it, not just in wrestling, but other sports. They're starting to have a different image of their daughters, like a daughter can be tough and strong and athletic and beautiful. And so they're being more open-minded in allowing their daughters, signing them up with these wrestling clubs that were normally they would have only thought about their son. Now they're also considering, their daughters. So
Yeah, and I think it's really along with that, just bringing that awareness to parents, right? It's bringing that awareness to what this sport can really do. And I heard so many times over the years, so many times of how this sport has just brought their daughters out of a shell and just
Yes.
give them confidence and give them the ability to deal with adversity. And those are the real riches of the sport of wrestling, right? Those are the things that really this give. And championships are one thing, but the riches of the sport are, the confidence, the dealing with the adversity, just the self-awareness and that people get from the sport of wrestling, the self-confidence and just self-esteem and things like that can be really given through the sport. I mean, I think it's helping parents see that, helping administrators see that, helping teachers and maybe the coaches, maybe they already see it. Maybe they don't, but maybe it's people right on the fringe, that are still around those schools. So the high schools, the junior highs, even the grade schools. I mean, getting to those people that are looking for creative ways to educate these children anyways, and give them a few more ways, give them the sport of wrestling, and
Right.
ways like that can open up some more doors. And some kids don't fit into the other structures. They don't fit into a basketball. I mean, I think the reason I stuck with wrestling is I didn't have to talk to anyone. I was so shy as a young kid. I could just go in and I could wrestle, and I didn't have to talk to anyone. When I was in T-ball, I had to talk to people, and it was very, very, very uncomfortable for me. So not everyone is going to fit into those team sports, right? But
That's true.
for them in the wrestling room, right? That they can grow and learn from, and they can just be themselves, right?
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Another good idea where I've seen it work and expose our great sport and have people become more familiar with it is I've seen a few in junior high programs, high schools and junior high schools, they actually will offer a PE class that's wrestling. And they have both boys and girls, and they separate. The girls will wrestle another girl, around their same weight class, and the boys, and they show them very basic techniques. So it's still a PE class, but it introduces them to wrestling and to technique. And, they have a choice in school. Like, do I sign up for, during their PE class, do I sign up for the wrestling class, or do I sign up for the self-defense class, or do I sign up for, the volleyball class? But having wrestling as an option for those students that are interested, and it gets them actually exposed to the sport. And some girls will try it in their PE class and go, oh, I really love this. And then after school, the coach offers, a wrestling team for girls. And so you see a lot of girls coming out for it that way.
Interesting. I like it. So I got a couple more here. So this individual said that I've been to a lot of coaches meetings where coaches talk about how they don't want to deal with girls and make practices as hard as they can to make them quit so they don't have to have them on their team. So what do you think we can do to change this philosophy?
Well, I think it's going to change with time, but I remember I could speak from my personal experience. Some of it is up to the wrestlers as well, to the female wrestler that's going out as well. So I remember for me, like I said, I the powerhouse of a wrestling program, right? And I had that same initial attitude from the coach that, look, this is not a joke. This is a tough wrestling program, and why is a girl trying to come out for my team? And I remember what our coach would do is say, I'm not going to cut anybody from the team. I don't make cuts from the team. I'm not going to cut anyone from the team. You're going to cut yourselves. And he would make practice so hard till about 5 people would quit. And it was usually the football players that were coming off of football season, but they're just not enough. And so those guys would just, slam the door and walk out of the wrestling room and go, this is too tough. This isn't for me. And then until 5 guys did that day, then he would say, okay, practice is over for today. See you tomorrow. And he would have that for a week. And that's how people would cut themselves and instead of the coach. So he made them so tough. So part of it, wrestling is a tough sport, right? So I understand initially you got to love it, but at the same time, there's a certain toughness with it too. So I think for girls going out for wrestling, just expect that. Just know it is going to be tough. It's not going to be easy. Even, it's not as tough as it was 30 years ago when they really made it impossible for us. But still, there is that mindset still out there that they're not going to be welcoming of girls in their room. And so as a female wrestler, you just got to kind of expect that and work harder than anybody else and just, go in there and maybe win those coaches over. Some of my most favorite coaches were the ones that initially didn't believe in me and I kind of won them over. So part of the responsibility female wrestler, but then the other part, absolutely, hopefully these coaches that have that mentality, once they see that, okay, here's the girl and she loves the sport just as much as any of my boy wrestlers in here in the room. And for them to open up their mind and say, why shouldn't I give the same opportunity that I'm giving these boys? Why shouldn't I give that same opportunity to the girl? And hopefully more and more coaches, as they see girl wrestlers, they'll change that mindset and become more supportive. And again, like I said, other coaches will have to kind of convince and talk to their fellow coaches that have that mentality and convince them, like, look, give these girls opportunities. They deserve to be there just as much as the boys do. And then I think with time, like Terry said, that the coaches with the old school mentality, they're gonna die off, and the new coaches are gonna replace them that are more open-minded and realize that girls wrestling is good for all wrestling, for their whole program. For them to allow girls to wrestle is only gonna help their boys team.
And I really think it is changing that dialogue. Right? It's really, I think it's turning it back around to the coaches in that conversation, right? And just really putting it on them and asking why are they coaching? What is this really about? Sport is nothing more than about educating our youth, right? And giving them the tools to be successful in life. Right? And I think it's throwing that back on them and asking them what are the reasons for their coaching. And if it's hopefully it's for the reasons that I would say 99% of the coaches are out there, because they believe in the sport and what people can get from it, and we see the value of the sport on our youth, and if that's really the reason why they're coaching, then it doesn't make a difference if it's a man or a woman. They don't get to choose who comes into their history class. They don't get to choose who comes in the math class. Right? Whoever comes in, they teach you, and they're giving them the tools to be successful in the subject. This is just another classroom, right? It's another classroom where you have people walking through that door that want to be educated. They want to learn something from you. They want to take something from there that's going to benefit them later on down the road. And this is voluntary, right? So when a girl walks through your wrestling doors, nobody's making them go to that room, right? Just like they're making them go to math class, right? And they're walking through those doors because they want to be a part of something. No, not every one of them is going to be a student. Not every one of them is going to be the state champion, right? But they're still going to be a significant part of your team and can be a great part of your team, just like there is on any team. Not every person that comes up for your team is going to be, ultimately successful in that sport, but they can be successful in life because of the sport. Right? So I think it's throwing it back to the coaches and really asking them the questions on why they're doing what they're doing. Right? And I think that, you'll have a lot better, avenue, I guess. It's a lot better way to open up those doors of opportunity. Right? And even in the coach's mind, I think that just changes the dialogue enough to see that, yeah, that is why I coach. That is why I coach, because I believe in the sport. And so it's helping with those things. And really, it's just asking the right questions to get it out. But most coaches out there are great coaches and are in this sport for the right reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Just really helping them decipher through that in their own mind. And I can say that 18 years ago, I was no different, right? And until I had to start asking myself those, why do I want to get involved in this? Why do I want to make this my life's work? Right? And so I think it's throwing them questions back at the coaches.
No, I like that, Terry. I was actually talking to a football coach this morning about that very same thing. And, just what's, again, the why. I would hope that we're coaching because we believe we can help those young athletes and we can do it through the sport. And our sport is just a vehicle to teach those life lessons, we obviously are biased and we think wrestling's by far the best sport on the planet, bar none, no matter gender, no matter size, age, anything else.
It is.
But it's just belief in what you're doing and conviction. So I agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as we're kind of winding down here, I've got a last question here for you from Anonymous. So we'll take that for what it's worth here. Toughest match that you ever had? Physical match, maybe it was one that haunted you or best one, whatever. What was the toughest match you had?
Is Anonymous someone I wrestled?
Hey.
Yeah, honestly, ironically, I would say my toughest match was my first competitive match. Because, boy, anyone who doesn't know what wrestling is all about, like, you can watch a wrestling match, and if you've never wrestled, you can say, that looks easy, I can do that. And then you step on the mat, and I remember having my very first competitive wrestling match. Like, it was all great when I wrestled around with my dad, and he taught me moves and all of that. But I remember in high school, my first wrestling match, my first real official wrestling match. And I thought, what did I get myself into? And it didn't help that later I found out that the guy that I was wrestling ended up placing second in the world for cadet Greco. Like I said, my area was just a hot spot for producing great wrestlers. But I just remember that match, and I was getting pinned, and he had me in a head and arm and squeezing me, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh. And it was like maybe, I don't know, 2 minutes or whatever. And it seemed like an eternity. But for anyone who's never wrestled a real wrestling match, man, wrestling's tough. So I had no idea what I was in for. So I think that first wrestling match, my very first wrestling match, was probably my toughest. Once I figured that out, and once I figured out, the wrestling's tough, then I at least knew what to expect. And it still wasn't easy, any of my other matches, but at least I don't think it was ever as tough as that first one.
Terry, you got any of your stories you want to throw in there? What was the tough match you had?
Tough matches. I don't know which is the toughest. There's been a lot of tough people. I have a hard time saying which was the toughest match. There was a lot of tough ones that I didn't win.
I would have seen what the training was in that Iowa wrestling room and under Dan Gable, what those trainings were like.
Yeah, that every day was tough, right? I mean, every day was a struggle, and maybe the strongest person that I felt I ever wrestled and had to deal with on a daily basis was Tom Ryan. Right? I mean, Tom Ryan was so physically strong. Like, at the end of those workouts, I'd be completely toast, and it didn't matter how the day went. If I got the better of him or he got the better of me, I was completely spent after those workouts with Tom, because I had to use every ounce of my being to just, I felt like, stay afloat, right? And so Tom Ryan is really a great partner for me, but I don't know if it was a great partner for him, but he was a great partner for me because he challenged me from the beginning to the end.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know if you remember that webinar we had with Tom Terry, but he's got a very different perspective on that story.
Yeah, I think I think he's losing his mind, maybe. No, I don't. I mean, Tom was really tough. I mean, but there's been so many. I mean, Lincoln McRae was so tough. I mean, Lincoln was from the beginning. He was a young kid, right? He was a freshman when I was a senior, and you just knew that this snowball is going to get rolling, and he's going to be tough. I mean, Lincoln was tough from the beginning. I mean, you know, Daniel Gully, the same way. I wrestled Daniel Gully 3 times, I think, and I knew the first time, you know, he threw me and I had to come from behind, and he was just a young kid there, really, and I found a way to win that match, but, you know, the next 2 times didn't go so well. I mean, we had some tough matches, you know, but there's been so many. I mean, there's so many tough athletes out there.
I think a lot of people are going to say that their toughest match was Terry, though. I'll tell you a funny story about him. We were at, gosh, I forget what country we were in. We're in Mongolia or somewhere, and we had just finished a pretty hard training session with the national team. So all the athletes had finished up, and they were going to get, you know, ready or whatever for to head back to the hotel. And Terry always still, no matter what, after everybody else's training, had to still get his training in too. You know, he's just still likes to get that grind and that workout. And so he looked around, and of course, you know, I was hiding. I didn't want to be a practice partner at that point. And so he finds this practice dummy, like, you know, one of those wrestling dummies out in the corner. And so there's no live person there. So he goes and grabs that practice dummy, and he's just throwing this thing around and just pouring sweat and just grinding. And by then the athletes, the girls were all showered and coming back, and we're waiting for the bus. And here's Terry still just taking this poor wrestling dummy and just thrashing it. I think like the stuffing was coming out of it. And so all the girls, we all just kind of looked at each other and was like, oh man, he still hasn't changed one bit.
Yeah, I didn't have to talk to it. Nobody asked me any questions. I could just do it.
Well, maybe that'll be a good question next week when we have Fraser on, because according to Alex, you guys are still going grind matches, or at least before.
Yeah, Fraser and I had a lot of good grind matches, but you'll hear a completely different story because he is going mad. I know that. So with Fraser, he's going to have a completely different story than I had. But we'll let him tell his story, and then I'll tell you the true story.
There we go. There we go. Awesome. Terry, do you have anything else you want to add?
No, just Afsoon, thank you for being on, and I encourage everyone to get out there, buy the book, and she is what I said in at the beginning. You know, she's a true American wrestling hero, and we're proud to have her on as a part of this program and a part of our delegation, and it's been awesome to meet you over the years, and thank you for everything you do. So.
Thank you so much, Terry. That means the world to that. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Frank, for another great night, and that's about it.
And thanks for working with me on all those technical difficulties, Frank.
Yeah, I'm glad we got you on there. Not the smoothest, but hey, we got on. So great. Afsoon, it was great to talk to you. We really appreciate you. So thank you for the night.
Much. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. See you all next week.
Bye-bye.